All right, good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of the Water Commission to order at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, November 15th. For the roll call, Commissioner Halteman is out. He already pre-notified us on that one. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, that brings us to item number 4, citizen comment period. I don't think there's any citizens signed up. Great. Moving on to item number 5. 5A, approval of minutes for October 18th, Water Commission regular meeting. Any changes to the minutes on the left? On the right? Okay, we have no changes to the minutes. May I get a motion?
A motion to approve minutes.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. We'll move on to item 5B, discussion reports and updates, Utility Department monthly report. Mr. Steinmetz, please.
Good evening. For the month of October, we pumped 84.82 acre-feet from the Edwards Aquifer with a total for the year of 367.29 with a 149.49 available. With the Stage 3 restrictions in place, we have lost 136.25 acre-feet for the year. Daily, we monitor the Edwards Aquifer J17 well and Comal Springs flow so we can adjust how much withdrawal, if any changes were to occur. We have pumped from the Trinity 14 acre-feet with a year-to-date of 609. All distribution samples that were taken passed. There was a special sample taken for an 8-inch water main break that happened on Forest Water Circle on October the 7th. Have some pictures that we can show of that. Just a quick couple of pictures we had. We had to cut a 4-foot section out of there to repair it. There was the water main was sitting on pretty much solid rock. When they installed those water mains in Forest Waters, they didn't bed it with sand, so whenever a rock does get up against it, it'll eventually crack the main. Normally, if we had a crack in the main, we'd be able to drill holes on either side of the crack and put a clamp on it, but since the crack was on the bottom of the main, we pretty much had to cut a section out of it. With that, since we did have to turn off the water, we did have or issue a boil water notice for actually 2 residents because they were the only ones affected for that. That's the special sample because you have to take a special sample, and then once it comes back, you can rescind the boil water notice. We had a water loss of 3.4%. The utility department completed 358 work orders, 32 line locates, 1 new meter install, 1,695 meter reads. Total AMI notifications was 1,534. Down 185 from September. Automatic draft customers, 689, down 2 from September. AMI customer portals was 730, up 13 from September. E-billing is 389, up 5 from September. Abnormal usage was 159, up 5 from September. Continuous flow, 86, down 2 from September. Leak info code, 561, down 4 from September. Usage trend was 169, up 4 from September. Stage 2 restriction alerts were 559, down 203 from September. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Stephen. Are there any questions on the right? On the left?
You want to go first? On the pumping for the Edwards, I know you're monitoring. What is your projection we're going to be carrying over or we're going to lose?
We don't project that we're going to carry over any.
Well, lose, not carry over.
We're shooting for 20 acre-feet by the end of the year, but if we get up to 20 acre-feet before the end of the year, we can pretty much monitor it daily to bring it down slower. But yeah, we don't expect to go over this
Okay.
year.
Dr. Carmen? Okay, I just want to point out a couple of things, and these were brought up in the council meeting earlier this month, is that, first of all, when Stephen talked about the amount of water that we have, that has been, how much our allotment has been reduced due to drought conditions, that's almost 25% of our total that are allotted for the year, that 136 acre feet that he mentioned. So pretty bad drought conditions and reduction to our overall stuff that's out there.
Yeah, we've only been in 0 stages for 63 days for this year. So that's a pretty significant amount of time in a restriction.
And I think Councilmember Valdez mentioned at the city council meeting that Edwards Aquifer is actually paying farmers not to pump water. So it's pretty bad. All right. Moving on here. Oh, nice transition. Item is applicable to the Water Commission discussed at the city council meeting. Other items that are out there, everybody should congratulate Stephen for 22 years of service to the city. So thanks, Stephen, for your long history of service there. Appreciate that. And I do remember they said you're going to some training on the 7th and 11th of November. Did that happen?
Yeah, I went to leadership training up there in Bryan, Texas.
Good course?
Yes, very good.
Awesome.
Learned a lot.
Other stuff from the city council meeting, if you look at the consent agenda, pages 18 and 19 of the packet, there's some year-end financial data or some recent financial data from the Water Commission. Vice Chair discussed it at the last meeting. But if you're wondering where his source data is coming from, it's right there in the consent agenda. We have a new city staff member, Courtney. She's a new communication specialist. And I don't know if you all have noticed, but there's a new website design out there. And the website looks pretty awesome. You should check it out if you haven't recently. Let's see here. The city engineer presented, talked about the design plans at the 2252 for the TxDOT project. I think they have reviewed 100% of the plan comments, and I think we're just waiting on TxDOT permit for that, if I remember correctly. Yep, good. All right, other stuff. The water leak adjustment that y'all recommended last commission meeting was approved. There were a couple of notes on that, though. Councilmember Valdez noted that they had not repaired the PRV yet, and Stephen was going to follow up with them to make sure that they understand future adjustments won't be approved without that PRV replacement. And Councilmember Bauer wanted to follow up on why the AMI alert was delayed. Did we ever get to the bottom of those things, Stephen?
Not yet.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. There's also good discussion about the 2023 Texas legislative session. Encourage you to go to the website and look at the video if you're curious about that. And we did talk about the utility work happening on 3009. If you've seen that, if you've been wondering what that is, they're pushing fiber there. They're still pushing the fiber. I think that is it. Ms. Kane? Okay.
I think that's pretty good coverage of the meeting.
Thank you. Ma'am, anything? Okay. Great, let's keep moving along here. We have on 5, well, I guess I should ask, any questions on the left or on the right in the city council meeting? Okay, great. We'll go to 5C now, recommendations, and we have a request for a water loss adjustment for 20810 Glen Cove for the billing period of June 23rd, 2022 to July 22nd, 2022. And then I'll remind everybody about law, the Water Commission does not have the authority to grant any financial credits. The Water Commission can only make recommendations to either city administrator to take action for credits up to $500 or to the city council to take action for credits over $500. And you'll notice in your packets that this one should be under $500 if I remember correctly. And Stephen, over to you, please.
Thank you. For this address, their water bill was 80,000 gallons. And as you can see on the spreadsheet, before their leak happened, you see a lot of areas where it shows 0 usage. And then after the leak was finally fixed, pretty much 0 usage, pretty consistent. He pretty much had a pretty tight water system up until that point. It looked like on June 27th, he had a repair done, but on that same day, his continuous flow occurred, and it had about an average of 20 gallons per hour. It went on to that until the 7th and busted on that day and ran until 7/8/22. He did say he had a repair according to the invoices on July 11th and July 14th. I wrote him asking some questions about if this was all part of the same leak that happened on June 27th, and he said that's what he believed, but his plumbers were trying to say that it wasn't, but apparently they consented and gave him a discount on the bill of $400. Yeah, this one looks pretty cut and dry. A tight system before the leak, after the leak, tight system. I was going to recommend approve a credit of $426 to their account.
Thank you, Stephen. Do you have any questions for the water department or the utility department? Start on the right. On the left. I just had one clarification there. You said the $400, that was a repair credit from the,
Yeah, he, like I said, he argued with the plumber because they were trying to say it wasn't part of the same leak from the beginning, but as you look at the data, it's pretty evident that it was. So I guess he won that battle on getting a little bit of a discount for it.
okay. All right, as a little summary here, I think everybody's seen the data and saw that the leak was going on there and a pretty obvious bust and then a couple of repairs. I don't think there's a whole lot of questions or concerns on this one. Is there any discussion on this, starting on the left-hand side first? Anything on the right? Okay, if there's no further discussion. Looking forward to a recommendation here, and this would be a recommendation to the city administrator, since it is under $500.
So I'll do it. I make a motion that we recommend to the city administrator the approval of a water bill adjustment in the form of a credit of $426.50 to the customer at 20810 Glen Cove.
We have a motion to recommend to the city administrator for the leak adjustment for 20810 Glen Cove for $426.50. So I have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the left? On the right? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, so that approves the motion to recommend to the city administrator for the leak adjustment. So that brings us to 5C, number 2, water rate structure. Over to the vice chair.
I'm going to turn this on. Oh, they're even trying to hurry up. Put it all the way on the very last slide. Well, it's where I wanted to, but I probably should. All right, so in a previous commission meeting, we went through a fair amount of this, and I believe everybody here was in attendance at that, so I'll go kind of quickly through those parts and just focus on what was added. And I will advise you that last Wednesday, Commissioner Stone and I met with City Administrator Kane and some other folks from city staff and kind of went over this as well. So this is the staff and subcommittee recommendation to the commission, and then we'll consider whatever action the commission wants to take. There we go. So again, I went over this last time, so I'll just leave it up here for a second. You guys can take a look. The bottom line is there's been 3 years of very significant increases prior to this. So these are things we're going to talk about. Again, you've already heard all this. The study objectives, bottom line on this one is recommending no change. So the objectives, the emphasis is on full cost recovery to build up our 12 months M&O reserve with a full year of debt service and to hopefully have stable rates so that we're not coming back to customers every year with a large increase like we have been. And in addition, making sure we follow cost of service principles and then encouraging conservation, the usual objectives that we've had before. So we'll go over where we are now and how the model performed. So again, current rates, you've seen this before, so unless there's questions, I'll just move on through that. I'm going to linger here for just a moment. There's 2 points I want to make. So this is comparing 21 through last year and 22. And I would like to first point out that when we changed the volume tiers and went to charging water with the first gallon, the effect of that was that the lower half of each tier saw an increase. So if you look, for instance, from the 1,000 to 5,000, cost per gallon went up 282 because there was none prior to that, but the 5 to 10,000 did not have a change. So basically, the bottom half of each new tier saw an increase. And in addition, the base rate increased. So that's one point. The second point, though, I want to focus your attention on the user that has 5,000, that used 5,000 gallons. So in 21, they would have paid only the base rate fee of $27.50 and no volume charge. That first 5,000 would have been included. So last year, that same customer would have paid $2.82 per 1,000 gallons, so roughly $14 plus $30 or $44 roughly for that 5,000 gallons, when the previous year they would have paid $27.50. So for that particular user, that's a little bit less than a 50% increase. Going up the tiers, it would be a smaller increase for 5,000 to 10,000 because the volume tier rate didn't change for that customer. Then the next tier up, they would have a significant increase, but not as bad because you're spreading it over more gallons. But the lower customer tiers had a fairly significant increase. And we knew that. That was part of generating that revenue stability. But keep that in mind. It'll be important later. All right, Commissioner Stone helped with this. We updated the benchmark cities that we've looked at in the previous years. So in red, you see Garden Ridge, and that kind of shows you as you go up the volume tiers where we fall. And in the background slides in your packet, you had additional cities for a wider range of figures if you wanted to look. All right, this is the actual history of consumption. And again, you saw this part of the slide before. What I want to point out that I've added at the bottom there, you see it's an 11.9% increase for our customers inside the city. That's a significant increase in consumption from 21 to 22, as would be expected with the environmental conditions that we had. Recall that there was a plus or minus 12% standard deviation as we went through time. So that increase was roughly in line with what you'd expect as the largest increase you would see. All right, outside the city, I'll just point out that it was only a 3% increase. So again, they pay a lot more. They have other sources of water, and they did not increase their consumption near as much as the customers inside the city. All right, this was the year prior. It's just here as a reminder. So if we consider our median and mean users, again, we don't have direct data for that, so these are kind of proxies. But if we look at number of bills, and we kind of look for that 50th percentile, you would see for residents inside the city, that lies in the second tier, right? Near the top of the second tier would be the 50th percentile. If we look at average gallons per month, in other words, our mean user is closer to 16,000. What that is showing us is that there's the higher end users are kind of pulling the average up, but most of our users are still in the low tier 1 or at the time, tier 0 and tier 1. Outside the city, similar, but it's harder to tell because most of the users are in that very bottom tier. As you can see, there's not much difference. The reason I showed this slide is when we look at the new one, we're looking at tiers that go from 0 to 10,000. So the outside the city, that difference is completely absorbed in the data. Both the mean and the median are within that first tier. Inside the city, we still have the median user, if you will, is still probably at the bottom end of tier 2, but our average user is near the upper end of tier 2. All right, and again, you saw this slide last time. The only thing that is different is after going through the data that's available, we really don't have any better numbers than what I briefed you on last time. So what I just want to emphasize in the box, the 122.9, that was the forecast net revenue from the model from last year. That includes the 116,000 that we were setting aside towards reserve. The actual performance based on the revenue and expense report is a net revenue of around 322,000. So the difference is about 200,000. Now the question is, how does that line up with expectations? So if you'll notice under the total revenue column, there was a 12% increase. The total expenses went up 2%. That's about a net difference of 10%. If you use 2 million as our revenue number, 10% of that is 200,000. So we see that 200,000 is pretty much explained by simply the change in consumption, but not entirely. So I'll get to that a little bit later. But bottom line is the model still performs fairly well, with one exception, which I will talk about in a few minutes. Okay, so the next step in the process is to update the model data. So you're familiar with the model by now. I won't spend any more time on that, but it's a spreadsheet-based model. This just shows you the consumption figures that were put in for inside and outside the city limits. They came directly from the utility reports. It also summarizes the number of accounts. I do want to highlight that the consumption outside compared to inside is less than 3% of the total. All right. Other assumptions that are in the model, the growth rate. We consider that new home construction is still going to remain low. There should be some commercial construction starting at some point. So those are the two factors to consider. With the 3/4 inch meters, the model has a 0.5% per year growth rate inside the city with 0% outside. Based on the number of meters that we have, that's a projection of +8 meters over the next year. In green, we see what the increase was last year, so that way you can compare what the next year's forecast is to last year's actual performance. 1 inch meters, no change. 1.5 and 2 inch meters, 10% per year, but the numbers of meters are very small, so that's only 2 meters. In the FY22, there was an increase of 1 meter. So my feeling is that those assumptions are comparable to performance. The next one, though, is projected change in average consumption. The intent in the model for that is as people adopt things like low-flow toilets and other conservation measures, if everything else stayed the same, you would see a small decrease in consumption. So the model has in there an assumption of -1% per year. But what that does not do, you can't separate that out from the environmental increase, just the demand increase as conditions change. So if we look at FY22, there was a 9% increase. So that's a difference. It's going to forecast a decrease, but this was an abnormally hot year, so it's unlikely that we would see a similar increase next year. So I'm pretty comfortable with that assumption. Then the next one down, model reduction in average consumption after a 10% rate increase. This is the one I want to talk about a little bit because I think this is much of the difference in the performance of the model and what we saw this year. So I just want you to keep this in mind. What this assumption says is if the rate for a particular customer increases by 10%, the demand in that tier would decrease by 2%. So the model would automatically do that. It's to capture the elasticity of demand for price. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go on. And in particular, that our lower tier customers saw an almost 50% increase in price. All right. The last item that's on that slide is connection fees manually set to budget projection. So the model does not use like, we're going to have 10 new meters, here's what the actual fees are for those meters. What the model does, it takes what was the budgeted revenue for meter fees and just spreads it out. So that way the model over the next year should generate the revenue that was predicted. So just be aware that it's a difference in the way things are actually done. All right, this slide you saw last time, just as a reminder, we've got 5% inflation in the model this time, and it's set up so that over the course of the next year, the expenses would come out to be equal to what was budgeted. So that's just the way the model is set up. All right, the debt service schedule is put into the model. It's based on our current debt service schedule. It does not include any forecast for future projects. So as the years go out, that number is actually decreasing as bonds are paid off. But it will match for next year. All right, and then just recall that as we go through the case studies, what we're actually changing is the base rate and the volume tier. All right, the last thing that, you took my slide builds away, so I have to talk through this. In the model, you put in a number for how much money needs to be generated towards the reserve fund. That's part of the actual model. So the $1,830,000 is from the budget. The budget also indicated that our reserve level at the end of last year was 1.2 million, so that generates the difference of 571,000. That's our shortfall. The replenishment rate is over 5 years, so that means in the model itself, it is requiring $114,367 per year. So when you see the net revenue, that's revenue above that figure. All right, now what's in red is our unaudited financial information. So while the budget has 1.2 million, what we had actual performance is closer to 1.5, almost 1.6 million. So if you use that number, the shortfall is only 249,000. So now the whole point last year was to generate reserves, right? To recover our reserve rate over that 5-year period. So what I did on this slide is I said, well, that gives us 4 more years. So if we take our current deficit, if you will, and spread that over 4 years, then we would only need to generate $62,000 per year towards reserves to do that. Again, the council's focus last year was on generating the revenue up to 12 full months. So there's no benefit to the city really of doing it slower, right? If we get it early, that's a good thing. So in the model, we left the 114,000 figure in there. And if we have a year next year like this year, basically the model predicts that we would recover those reserves between 2 to 3 years instead of another 4. So we get there maybe a year, possibly 2 years early at this particular rate. But that gives you an idea of the range. If we were to change the model and put that lower number in there, it doesn't really change the performance. It simply would generate more revenue according to the model because you wouldn't be setting it aside for reserves. All right. So then we get to the proposals. And the first part is just development of options, and then we'll cover a couple of results and the recommendation. So the first thing is cost of service principles. Again, the way our accounting data and utility data is set up, being a small utility, it's not broken down to where you can really assign those costs to specific classes of customers. So what we do instead is look at some averages. So if we take our total expenses and spread that over the total number of accounts, as you can see, that's about $90.53 per account. So that's what you would need to generate per account if we generated the same portion of our costs from every customer equally. Of note, the debt service portion of that is $35.26. I bring that up because in some of the literature, One of the bases for deciding what your base rate is that base rate should cover the debt service. That way every customer is paying an equal share of that. Our base rate for inside the city is $30, so it's pretty close. Outside is in the $45 range, so it's a little bit over, but in general, we're in the ballpark. All right. With that said, this shows you what the actual bill would be. So the average residential outside usage was around 9,000 gallons. That customer would pay $87.20, which is just a little bit less than that $90 figure I mentioned. The average residential inside user is around 17,000 over the year. That customer would be paying $91.45 each month, which is just slightly over that $90 figure. So they're comparable. Now, these are for the 3/4 inch meters, just to be clear. All right, now, but those are different number of gallons. So another way to look at it is to spread those costs over each gallon of water. So looking at cost per 1,000 gallons, that works out to $5.31. That figure, as it has been in the past, is right between Tier 2 and Tier 3. That's relevant because that's what we use for our leak adjustments as a proxy for cost of water. Now, I did look at, okay, what is the comparable if we do it for our average customer? So if we look at the residential inside customer who uses 17,000 gallons, and we take their bill and divide that by 17, you get $5.38. So basically, on a cost per account or cost per 1,000 gallon basis, our residential inside customers are pretty much paying their share of the cost. Just keep in mind that for the residential inside customer that only use 5,000 gallons, that same number works out to about $8.80. So they're paying perhaps more than their share. All right, on the residential outside, since their average customer is only using 9,000 gallons, that works out to $9.69. But that just gives you an idea about how the costs are spread through our system. I keep saying cost, it's really expenses, not costs. Like I said, we can't really attribute exact cost to each revenue class with the way we have our data set up. All right. So then we looked at various cases. So the baseline case is we do nothing. What would that generate? And then there were some questions in the subcommittee and with the staff because the amount that's generated is so much more than was predicted. So we looked at what if we plugged in FY21 consumption numbers to the model. It should have produced roughly the same result that the last year did because you're using the same consumption. The only differences would be differences in expenses. And you'll see those results here in a minute. And then we looked and said, well, last year was abnormally high consumption. So what would happen if we had a really wet year? So historically, you may recall, when we did this the very first year, and water markets did their look back, about the largest change we saw year to year was 17%. Again, the standard deviation was 12, but the largest was about 17%. So I ran one baseline case with a 17% reduction just to see where we'd be. The actual tiers, we kept 5-year reserve recovery. I've already mentioned that. I did look at inside versus outside rates. Since we have excess revenue, would it make sense to equalize those? So you'll see that. I looked at the possibility of reducing our base rate slightly, and then I looked at a combination. So here are the results. And I'm not going to go through these in detail. I just want to highlight the end result number. And I will point out that this will not be in the council slides. These would be backup. They'll only see the summary. But if we did nothing and we had a year just like we did this year, the model predicts a net revenue of $495,000. But remember, that is above the $114,000 that the model has set aside for reserves. So it's almost $600,000 of net revenue. When I put last year's consumption figures in, the model would predict $213,000 net revenue, which is considerably more than what we estimated from last year. The difference between those two is $281,000, and I would like to point out that's similar in magnitude to the difference we saw between the model's forecast and our increased consumption. Right? We had $199,000 of additional revenue than what the model predicted this year. So the same order of magnitude, but there's still about $190,000 $100,000 unaccounted for, almost. It looks to me, as we went through it, that about 20,000 of that is differences in meters. We had more new meters than we expected, more accounts. But the remaining difference, I think, is because of that price elasticity assumption. Because we had such a significant rate increase at the lower tiers last year, I think the model artificially reduced the consumption numbers and predicted lower revenue than we were going to expect. And you'll see in a minute, I have some other things that will support that. But that shouldn't happen this year, right? We won't see a large increase. So I think these numbers should be pretty stable. All right, so with that said, if we look at the worst case, the 17% reduction of consumption, our model still indicates about $190,000 in net revenue over and above reserve requirement. All right. If we make changes, so in this first case, I said, well, what if we make our outside tier rates the same as the inside tier rates? So the theory here would be the additional cost to the city for serving folks in the CCN outside the city limits would be recovered via the meter fees, not via the volume fees. So if we do that, it reduced the net revenue to $479,600. So basically, a little over $15,000 difference. It's basically insignificant. On the other hand, you might have a theory that says the volume rates are where they should be, right? The cost to the city is greater for those outside because of the water we pump. If you believe that, then we could look at setting the meter fees equal. But I will point out that that's almost the same amount of reduction in net revenue. There's such a small amount outside the city that it doesn't really affect revenue very much at all. All right, what if we took 50 cents off the base rate for everybody? That predicts 485,000 net revenue, so that's only a difference of about 10,000. But if you look at the figure on the lower right, what you will see if we do that is we lose a little bit in rate stability. If you look at the lines that are in the blue colors, you'll see that that dark blue is always a little bit less than the dark orange. That's showing you less revenue from the base rate. So more from volume, which means it would be affected more by consumption changes. All right, what if we did both? So this is a 50% base rate decrease and setting the residential outside tiers equal to residential inside, and you see you still have 470,000 of net revenue. Now, if we had that dry year, though, remember that could take 200,000 off of that, but it still leaves you positive. All right, so those are the cases that we looked at. Here's the summary that shows both of them. The one in orange is making no changes. The one in yellow was combining a small base rate reduction and setting the outside tiers equal to the inside tiers. Now I'll talk about the committee's recommendation and why we think the way we do. So our recommendation is actually that we don't make any changes for this year. We just leave the rates alone. So these are the current rates that we have right now. And here's the rationale. First, the whole point of what we had to go through last year and the pain that was endured was to recover our reserves after the AMI project and some other things. So while we have made great progress, we're still below the target. So that's the number one comment. Number two, the council wanted to do that within 5 years. So yes, we went faster because it was hot and dry, but there's no guarantee of hot and dry next year. Even more importantly, there's some risk of significant capital expenditures ahead. The water master plan is just about done, but we don't yet have a good handle on what new projects might be coming up that would require financing. We also have some older storage infrastructure that may require replacement at perhaps an unexpected time. And the full impact of the FM 2252 project and the widening of the intersection is not fully known, how that might impact us. In addition, there's significant market risks right now, both due to inflation, which could result in higher debt costs, and we have supply risk because of the rapid growth in the area could potentially impact the aquifers and the availability of water through there. Both of those could require tapping into reserves that we have not anticipated. So our recommendation was just to stay the course and go one more year and then reevaluate at that point. Again, keeping rates stable for customers is still a benefit. So that was the recommendation from the subcommittee and the staff. Views of others, which means me, I still am concerned about the large difference between the inside city and outside city rates. I think the justification for that, which is originally that they did not pay taxes to the city outside, is no longer as relevant now that the water company is funded by rates. So at some point, those things might need to be equalized, but whether this is the right time or not is a whole different matter. Again, as a staff and full committee, the vote was to recommend no change. So that is the recommendation. So, Mr. Chairman, it's over to you. The summary slide is there, and there's some things that could be thought about for discussion, but ultimately, we're looking for what recommendation we want to make to council.
Okay, I've got a few questions that we can come back to, but I was going to go ahead and go to the left first and see. Are y'all good?
I have a question of the funds that we're receiving in lieu of water rights when we had development. I don't know if there's any way you can figure that into the model and where that money would go.
So, for two parts. First part is that's not in the model right now, nor are any commercial rates. So it's just based on what we know and what the budget is projected. Second point, though, once that is done, then as part of the budgeting process, they would set a revenue target. And so that would be added in as a fee inside the model, and it would be set to match the budget. But right now, there's none in there.
But when we revisit this in a few years, couple years, we hope, you're thinking about commercial rates versus residential. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, this commission has a committee to study that, whether, I won't presume what the outcome will be. But if there is a change to that, plus at some point there'll be, wastewater rates as well, those can be incorporated at that time, but they're not here now because none of that's been approved in the budget.
Thank you.
All right, I'll go ahead and start peppering you with some questions here. So on slide 20, and you mentioned it later on too about the elasticity assumption, is there any way to remove that assumption or to modify that assumption? Because I think it's we've shown through several ways that, through a lot of data, I should say, that our demand's not that elastic. Is there any way to change that assumption, or is that hard built in?
Yeah, no, it's easily changeable. I have not run a case with it. That's an entry that you make. So what has been entered in is that 2% decrease, which is the same as it's been each year. So we just left it the same for consistency. But
Okay.
absolutely, it could be changed. In fact, I don't know if we still have that model here, but it'd be easy to fix if you wanted to try to see what it would look like.
It's okay. For now, that's okay. I think I would hate to start changing the model after perhaps 1 year of data. We don't quite have the stats to back that up to actually change it. So I'm okay with the default. I was just wondering if it could be modified. On slide 27, you talked about in part of your talking, you said the 5K cost. If you break it down by gallon, for a 5,000 gallon customer, if you break it down by gallon, it goes up to $8. But I think that, I'm not sure that math actually works out when you start thinking about fair share, debt service payments and stuff. Just being cautious on those words, I think maybe a caveat there might be.
Yeah, so that's just taking the 282 times 5 plus the base rate and then dividing that by 5. So
I totally understand that. I just bring it up because
yeah.
I think keeping our base rate in the neighborhood that it is to have that base rate covering that debt service collection is, we're slightly under it now, so reducing base rates more and pointing out stuff like that, I'm not sure it tells the whole story. That's all. A little bit concerned about those words. slide, when you were on slide 37, you talked about inflation being a debt risk. What did you mean by that? Did I hear that right?
So, yeah, I probably didn't use the right word, but basically, the cost to borrow funds is likely to increase as everything else increased.
Future
So
debt.
that
Okay.
could cause any future projects to draw more from, to increase debt service and then reduce our surplus.
I understand where you're coming from on that one. Okay. When I listened to you talk, I was obviously writing a bunch of stuff down. I got one more on slideology on slide 15, if you don't mind going there real quick. When I look at this slide, and this is just for your larger presentation to City Council, on the left-hand side, on the left, particularly under the red box there, you have the required reserve contribution that's subtracted out there to get that gain lost fund balance of 6,000. On the right, you didn't put that in. Is that telling the story we want to tell? Because then it looks like the gain loss to the fund is 322, when realistically, I mean, you're still getting a reserve contribution out of it. I'm not sure why you left it that way. I'm just trying to figure it out here.
Yeah, that's always a question. The issue, so the first column is supposed to be the model forecast. In the model itself, that 116,516 is internal to the model, so it doesn't show up. So if folks are looking at what the model predicted last year, the model predicted $6,425 in net revenue. So I was just trying to show that to make it comparable with the revenue and expense report, we really have to add that back in. So the two numbers to compare is the 122,000 and the 322,000. There is no required reserve contribution in our budget. We don't list that out as a separate number. That's why there's nothing there. But it could be that I should reverse the order of that, if that would make more sense to you.
I don't know. Maybe just talk to Ms. Kane about it and just make sure that we're telling the right story and that we don't get folks confused when we're telling that story. That's all. I want to make that one. Makes a lot more sense now that you explained it again, but I always get lost in this one every year. I swear.
Perhaps it should be a backup slide.
All right, and the last thing, I mean, when we look at these things, I think that you hit on all the risks to no change and things that could happen, right? Inflation, a wet year, I think are the two main risks that are out there. I think you discussed all those things. Oh, and infrastructure, unexpected infrastructure challenges there. That's why we have a reserve, in my opinion, on some of this stuff. And I think, I mean, I'm happy with this, and I like the recommendations that the subcommittee came up with and everything, just from my own personal opinion. So I'm trying to remember here, I think this is just by consent that we move on and continue to present this to, you present to City Council here in a few weeks.
I believe that's what we did last year, but
Go ahead, ma'am.
To be a motion by the commission to move, to make the commission's recommendation, making a recommendation from the commission to council.
I understand. So we can get a official
Motion.
commission recommendation to
Yes.
council.
Yes.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. So I went on a little bit of a monologue there. Did that strike up any new questions for anybody? Last chance? No? Okay, then I'll go ahead and ask for a motion for a recommendation to City Council with the associated presentation for no rate change for the upcoming year to the water rates.
I'll make that motion. If you'll read it again.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So I have a motion to forward to City Council a recommendation for no rate change to the water rates for the upcoming year. Great job on the presentation again. And I'm sure that City Council is looking forward. I don't know if you watched the video, but I refuse to give any spoilers I saved everything for next month for you. All right, we are to 5C, number 3, water pressure regulations. Dr. Carmichael, was this your addition to the agenda? I'm trying to remember.
I believe Commissioner Halterman.
It was Commissioner Haldeman's.
Perfect. Did he pass along his concerns to anybody?
No.
Okay. We'll table that to next month then. Moving on to Water Commission activities and projects. I'm not going to go through each one here. If anybody has anything, they can speak up. I think the only, go ahead, Dr. Carmichael. I see you reaching for the mic. Just getting ready. Okay. I think the only question after I go through all these, we've heard enough about water rates, and I don't think we have anything in the other areas. The only thing about strategic planning, I was wondering about the strategic plan. You mentioned that it's nearing approval. Do we have a timeline for that at all?
So if Nancy could speak to that, because that's who we were talking about it in the meeting last week.
I have a meeting with the city engineer tomorrow, and tomorrow morning, and I will try to get a little bit more of a timeline as to when we can expect the master plan.
Okay, great. I mean, it sounds like it's getting close. Are we gonna, do you think before the December meeting, or do you think after that?
I highly doubt,
Okay,
I suspect it would not come to y'all probably until after the first of the year,
great. Okay,
most likely the earliest February. I know that they were still under some review process on it, but I will try to get them pinned down a little bit better tomorrow.
no problem. That's all good. I just wanted to, if we're gonna see it quickly, I just want to make sure we got it in time to discuss it, that's all, or when we would discuss it. So we can worry about that a little bit later. Any other questions on Water Commission activities and projects? There's one other thing I was going to bring up on that, but any questions from y'all? No? The only other thing I was going to mention was about we have 2 open positions on the commission. I think we might have 1 applicant here, so I would encourage y'all to go out there, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, see if we can find somebody willing to serve there to get the Water Commission up to full strength. I think we'd all appreciate that going forward. All right. Future agenda items on the left.
I think carryover would be the question of conditions on a cash payment in lieu of water rights. And Commissioner Halterman and I met on that and discussed some issues. I think existing code covers a lot of the concerns about water fixtures and the efficiency, and we may focus a little more on landscape, xeriscaping type issues. But that's about all I had to report for now.
So I'm happy to add that to the future agenda items, but what I would ask is that first, before we do that, that you would talk to the city staff, so we make sure that we get exactly what we need to discuss on there, and make sure that we're not confusing the limits between us and through planning and zoning. That's all. Just make sure that everything's clear before we add it on there. That's all I ask, and then go ahead and forward the final answer there to Michelle, and we'll be good. Any future agenda items? You're done for the year, right? Okay. All right, so 5D, number 2, the next meeting will be December 20th, 2022 at 6 p.m. right here in City Hall. That brings us to item number 6, second citizen comment period. And if there are any citizens that would like to comment, step forward at this time. All right. At that point, can I get a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? All right, this meeting is adjourned at 6:55 PM. Thank you.